A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to some more HJN Super Graphics. Now, I have gone on a pretty good amount of time here in terms of this whole sub-series as it is, but let's just say we'll work on several more of these games in particular before I eventually go on ahead and head back into my normal direction with HJN. Basically, whatever topics come to mind, or if you guys have any requests for that sort of thing, please do fill them out down below in the comment section, or anything really. Even by Gmail, I'd be totally fine with it. But anyways though, let's get it going. We have another game worth talking about here. This one is relatively fresh in my mind as I had played it several times recently, but it hasn't really been finished quite yet, so don't really expect me to get all too much into the detail here. So, Grounded is what we're going to talk about for today. Yet another contender of 2023. So, with all of the titles I've had to say about 2023, there must have been at least 24 of them so far. And I'm sure willing to bet, by the time I bring this series to an end, once again, I'll probably have more of them on the way as well. How does Grounded hold up compared to most of the other ones? Well, so far from my own experiences, we do in fact have ourselves a unique scenario. If you're familiar with the Honey, I Shrunk films, going as far back as 1989, and with a few other films that have come around since then, supposedly with a reboot on the rise, where good old Rick Moranis is likely going to come back after all these years. Well, we still have yet to hear more about that stuff. But Grounded actually does happen to take that sort of concept into account, where a scientist happens to utilize shrink technology in order to shrink them down basically to the size of most common insects, including ants, weevils, and others of that sort of size. But somehow still being smaller than even spiders. Wow. So let's just say I would not exactly recommend this to anybody who is arachnophobic, because oh man, if I've taught you guys anything about Ark having ginormous spider-like creatures and whatnot, Grounded really does kind of put them to shame. And yeah, it goes without saying that arachnophobes really ought to stay away from this, because spiders are actually one of the main recurring enemies that you do happen to fight within this game entirely. But let's not get into much of the details without talking about the plot first. So anyways, we have a selection of 4 different main characters to play. I ended up choosing Pete, mostly because of his intuitions and because he does consider himself Small Pete, basically the underdog of the group. The other 3 characters seem to have their own unique abilities and their own particular stats within themselves, but I chose Pete for the heck of it. His stats were awesome, and he as a character was awesome too. Basically, the plot situates your character waking up practically in the middle of nowhere. Turns out you're in a cave, and when you crawl out, you happen to be on the surface. The grass blades are much taller than you are. And basically, as you pick up pebbles, as well as various plants, you eventually are able to craft primitive tools, including axes and hammers, in order to chop down grass blades and use them for utilizing various creative functionality. But on top of all that, the thing is that Grounded is basically meant to act not only as a story-driven game, but also as an online multiplayer co-op challenge. So where exactly are we going with all this? Well, the thing is that apart from the fact that you have different characters to select from, without customization, obviously, for some reason. I guess they didn't want people to make it feel too complicated compared to what it ought to be. Basically, an adventure where kids are shrunken down and they need to make themselves big again so they can get back home. But, of course, other things we ought to mention here. The game is mostly a first-person perspective. There's similar control functions to a certain other game that I had previously stated here, but trust me when I say, it'll make more sense when I say the title once again after I summarize all this. And then, of course, with a giant map worth exploring and all kinds of enemies worth fighting, and the fact that when you die, there's an icon that lights up on your map and even on your HUD to let you know exactly where your items are. What other game am I talking about here? Ark Survival Evolved. Yes, I've said that, haven't I? Yeah, Grounded is a lot, if not the same exact sort of thing as Ark. The only real difference is that you're shrunken down to the size of a bug, navigating around a yard, basically. There's water with lily pads, giant soda cans, an entire case of mints, an apple core or hot dog, berries that fall from the trees, various research stations, and even entire research labs that are situated within the yard itself. So, yeah. It's literally Ark repackaged after 6 long years. And just think about it. In 2023, that same year, what did we get? Ark Survival Ascended. Basically a whole remade version of Ark made to run on Unreal Engine 5. Yeah. Anyways, though, apart from all these Ark connections I've constantly been having here, Grounded actually does seem to have its own way of being its own thing. The thing is that unlike basically the modes of experience in which that we're used to with Ark and where we get upgrade points to upgrade our evolutionary stats, including oxygen, speed, stamina, health, and etc. In Grounded, there isn't a system that basically runs on progression in which you can level up. And of course, while Ark allows you to learn engrams, which allow you to create new tools and even advance your evolutionary phase through the cycles of history, going from primitive pickaxes and torches and whatnot to fabricating guns and houses entirely. With Grounded, though, raw science is the main currency here. The main XP that you use to level up. The higher your knowledge is, the more raw science you grab onto, whether it be from pickups that you find all over the map, or from analyzing certain items that you pick up using an analyzer at the research stations or whatnot. Basically, all of this raw science that you use, you cash in for different blueprints as well as learning different abilities known as mutations. Yeah, I feel like that's one big difference here compared to Ark. In Ark, you didn't necessarily get any certain upgrades or enhancements to your overall physique or fighting power or health or whatnot. With Grounded, though, these mutations, as they're referred to, are special tokens that you can get, whether it be from fighting enemies or encountering certain things or progressing through the story long enough or even cashing them in at the doctor's own lab. Yeah, I haven't really talked much about the doctor, have I? Basically, there's a point in the story where you get far enough to where you find an old tape recorder and there are lasers that you need to guide them in order to allow for the tape recorder to play off. And when it does, you learn about a guy named Wendell. He's basically a doctor, a scientist, if you will, who was actually responsible for running certain experiments in the very same yard that you were exploring in. So these kids basically got caught in the crossfire of one of his own experiments in his own backyard. So talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. On top of all that, when I basically got far enough into the game to encounter a certain lab underground, well, this lab in particular actually had a robotic assistant. Yeah. And what he does is he not only thanks me for helping him get back up, he also allows for me to grab a hold of a supercomputer chip for him to work with, as well as access to certain other labs that are apparently located elsewhere along the map itself. I can't say I haven't made it that far into the game yet to discover what other possibilities in the plot will ensue, nor have I ever gotten far enough into the game to find out the climax or even finish it. No. That truly has yet to be determined. But from what I gathered so far, it's a pretty impressive game. If you can actually get far enough without dying multiple times, just think about it. It's like all of the stuff that we've had to learn from Ark Survival Evolved. We've gone from waking up on the island, naked, freezing, starving, and whatnot, and with an implant in our arm, which apparently acts as our guide, as well as our evolutionary traits. We end up dying multiple times, learn from our mistakes, try not to approach the enemies too harshly or bum rush them. And there's always the time where a larger enemy or a more powerful foe is going to come across and instantly kill you. It of course can be hard to get back to the area where you were previously at, because sometimes those enemies will patrol the areas, and Grounded does pretty much the same sort of thing. I could certainly describe being killed by the likes of orb weavers, wolf spiders, stink bugs, and a good variety of different others that I've faced against. And man, even the ants can sometimes play hard to get. The workers are mostly passive and will sometimes come up to you curious, like George the monkey. Yeah. Or of course, there are the soldier ants, which are a bit more on the hostile side, and mostly if you approach them, they will attack you, territorial wise. But then of course, there come the abundance of different other bugs out there. And in terms of gathering all the weapons and items that you need, even food, including mushrooms, you're only able to pick the smaller mushrooms. But of course, when you're able to grab a hold of the smithing machine, you can in fact upgrade your weapons utilizing various ores that you collect in the yard as well, like quartz, for instance. So that way you can upgrade your weapons so they're powerful enough to basically chop up these larger objects. You can basically get full-sized mushrooms, the breath mints, pieces of an Oreo or the apple or the hot dog, like anything that you could possibly find that would require higher tier tools to work with. Yeah. There are of course also ranged weapons that you can get, but unlike what we had gotten in the evolutionary phases of Ark Survival Evolved, with all the engrams and all the points we accumulate from evolving over time, of course, Grounded is a bit more on the smaller scale here. The file size does speak for itself compared to Ark, which is usually at least 100 gigabytes, due to how huge the game is, for one thing. Grounded, of course, is way smaller in comparison, about a fifth of the file size, but we still do at least get a good variety of different tools and other such engrams to work with here. The more raw science we get, the more blueprints we can get just as well. But the main thing, of course, that we have to do here is to get ourselves grown back up again, utilizing Wendell's old technology. Because apparently, an accident had gone on, causing the labs to be in ruin, and his robotic assistant was even unable to help in all this ensuing chaos. So these kids were basically the last resort, the last hope for Wendell's experiments to live long and possibly prosper in the fields of science. So, like I've said though, with all the Ark/Honey I Shrunk connections that I brought together here, we got one heck of a game, utilizing the characteristics of both of these franchises in order to create something new. But it does work in its own way, to be fair. And I still am more than willing to give this one a good reasonable score because of the fact that it does charm me quite well with its own unique style. Getting to play a Honey I Shrunk the Kids game with Ark characteristics might seem something out of the ordinary, but it actually does give us that unique feel that we would probably have never experienced unless we were actually in the set of Honey I Shrunk the Kids. And it was certainly a unique concept overall. Getting shrunken down, putting in your backyard, and trying to find a way to survive, or at least get back to your normal size, before you possibly get eaten alive by the bugs that dwell within. So overall, Grounded is a really good game for what it is. And I certainly do like how well it possibly does in order to keep me entertained, keep my money's worth, and with all the progression I've made thus far, I'm more than willing to venture even further deeper into the unknown to see what more could Wendell have possibly done. What more could we potentially gain out of this? And most importantly, what more plot could be unveiled before I finally finish it? Only time will tell when that all comes together, but for now, let's get on to the scoring, shall we? Grounded, Grounded, Grounded. It's a unique title with a unique series of events that transpire because of a certain scientific accident. And with that, 8.6 out of 10.1. A good game with some unique ideas, and while there are connections to be made all across the board, there still is that unique feeling that it is still its own original thing, even though it does seem to borrow or even straight up rip off other things. But no matter what it is, the characteristics, the characters in general, the plot, the setting, and everything else that applies, we still do have a big contender for the current generation of console gaming. And I suppose that will do it for this current portion of HJN Super Graphics. I will come back once again with another piece of this series, just as well as I have done before. Until that happens though, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.